Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Texas Soccer Summit presented by the Striker Texas. This panel is brought to you by Gloria. Gloria is a new app where football fans and players can share content and interact with each other. On Gloria, you'll be able to talk about your favorite teams, topics, skill levels. You'll be able to easily find football content, and you'll be able to also have determinations in the entire world, not only what you're watching here locally, but also across the globe. Now, Gloria will be your home football for online, and be sure to catch it coming in late 2021. Now, my name is Christina Uncle. I am a CBS rules analyst covering Europa and UEFA Champions League. And I am excited to bring to you this topic here, which is what is the soccer world looking for? What is the expectation when it comes to VAR and everything that comes with it? And here we have a great panel today in front of us. We're going to be talking to several different individuals who have this ability and this different perspective to bring it out. Specifically, I'd like to go ahead and point out, thank you for joining me, gentlemen. First, I have Shaw Brown, who will be joining me here today on the panel. More than over 2 decades of experience in the broadcasting world. Shaw Brown has done 13 World Cups, producing them. I mean, that's incredible. We were just joking. A friend of ours is the only one who beats him with 15. Additionally, we have Shaw's worked for over 4 of the major broadcasting companies. And additionally, he has covered Major League Soccer for years, and now is currently covering Champions League as well as Europa League, and is a personal mentor of mine and brought me into the dark side on the TV world. Now, secondly, I'd like to introduce Ismail Elfath that we have here. He is a FIFA and pro referee that is joining this panel. Good friend of mine, seen him come up through the ranks. Incredible individual, has been in the MLS since 2011, FIFA referee since 2016. He himself has refereed at the FIFA Under-20 World Cup final in Poland, which, if anyone in this referee world understands, it's very hard to get a final in a FIFA tournament. It's something that we are incredibly proud for here in the United States, as he represents the United States on the panel. And just recently, he was awarded with the 2020 MLS Referee of the Year. So I'd like to introduce Ismail to the group. Third, we have here with us is Coach Mark Lowry. He is the head coach of El Paso Locomotive FC, a team here in the USL. He comes all the way from across the pond from Birmingham, England, as we're realizing Shaw and Mark come from the same place. Prior to joining El Paso, he was with Jacksonville Armada of the NASL, as well as with Orlando City prior to. A coaching with many licenses to him. He has a UEFA A and a B license, and he himself worked back in the day with 2 UPL teams, Wolverhampton, as well as Birmingham itself. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you, Dax McCarty. Dax, for anyone who's in the soccer world, specifically in the American soccer world, knows who he is. Blows my mind. Dax, is it 15, 16? I'm losing track how many years you've been in the MLS, but he is Benjamin Button. He doesn't seem to ever age. So we are always impressed to have Dax with us. He's currently playing in Major League Soccer there with Nashville. Many of you guys here in Texas know him with his time here in FC Dallas. And he also spent quite a number of time representing us on the United States international level. So with that, love to introduce you all. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump straight into it, because this is a topic that is hot and heavy right now. One of the things we said is open panel. We're going to have this discussion about what the football world expects. And for many of those people, right, we have these different pathways. We have TV production, we have coaches, active players, active FIFA referees, and we want to know, how are we all on the same page? Are we all on the same page? Do we need to get on the same page? So to this panel and so many different perspectives, and one thing I'm really excited is we're just going to jump right into it. Everyone's experience with VAR. What's your experience? What's your take on it? How do you think it's impacted your game? And we'll go ahead and, you know what? Let's start with Ish. I'm sorry, I call him Ish, good friend. So Ismail, we're going to go ahead and start out with VAR from a referee perspective and then dive into the rest.
Well, it doesn't matter how I feel. It's what Mark and Dax and Shaw think about it, because ultimately, it's a great question. Ultimately, when MLS pulled us together in 2016, said, "Hey, we're going to be one of the first 2 leagues in the world to experience with this. What do you think?" And like everyone else, we're like, "Gee, it's going to disrupt the flow of the game. It's going to cause everybody wanting to protest everything, et cetera, et cetera." If fast forward 4 years, we've had our bumps, we've had our falls, but I think overall, there's not a referee out there that tell you I wouldn't want to take a VAR help on a big game. I don't want to have a final, a playoff where a goal is wrong or an offside is wrong or a red card is wrong. Are we going to miss some? Yeah. But if you ask me, I think overall, at least, and I'm talking about Major League Soccer. I think we've been fortunate to have relatively pulled it off with success. Lot to improve, but compared to what I see out elsewhere, I think I'm happy where we're at. But like I said, I'm more interested in what our customers, which is players, clubs, teams, owners, the fans, think of it. It's even more important to us. Christina, can you still hear? Shaw? Yeah, you guys hear me?
I mean, I'll jump in. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah. I appreciate you taking that one first, but your perspective is obviously very important, right? From the referees, you guys are the ones implementing VAR. From a player's perspective, I think it's been unequivocally good for the game. It's been fantastic for the game of soccer in general. Now, we can get into the weeds all we want on the implementation of VAR and the different ways that it's implemented throughout the different leagues around the world. I'm sure we'll do that later on in the show, but with my experience with VAR in terms of how MLS has handled it, I think it's been very good. And I think you're always going to have bumps in the road whenever you're implementing something new. You have a lot of soccer purists out there who don't want to see the game change much, if at all. But the reality is, with the amount of money and the amount of passion and the amount of fans that are flocking to the game of soccer now, I think one thing you said that stands out to me about VAR is you want to get the biggest decisions right. And I think for the most part, 98, 99% of the time, VAR helps referees get the biggest decisions right. And so from my standpoint, it's been very good for the game. I do have my qualms with it. I do think that for the most part, we still need to let referees do their jobs and not necessarily rely too much on VAR. But if it is implemented properly, and I think MLS and the Bundesliga specifically are two leagues that have implemented it, in my opinion, in a good way, you can see the fruits of how important VAR is. The Premier League is a whole different ball game with the games that I've watched and the things that I have seen with how VAR is implemented. And I can't say that I'm a very big fan of that, but for the most part, I'm very happy with how VAR has changed the game for the better.
That's a relief to hear. Thank you.
Awesome. And sorry about that. I had a technical issue on my side, so I wasn't able to catch into that conversation until now. So, Mark, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with the two guys before me. I think that the progress that it's made in MLS over the past 3-4 years has been fantastic. I think always initially there's going to be growing pains. But I like where it's at right now in MLS. I think there's a good balance between the use of it and the utilization of it, and also letting the game flow and allowing that the game to organically happen, which for us coaches and players, I think is really important, because there's nothing more frustrating as a player or coach for the game to start at different moments. So we like to keep it flowing. I think MLS are at a good point right now where there's a good balance of it. And it kind of Dax touched me at the Premier League is still struggling with that, I think they're relying on it probably a little bit too much. And I think there's a hesitation with the referees and other officials on what they can and can't do right now, or what decisions they can and can't make with and without the use of VAR. So I hope they reach the point in the next couple of years where they get past that and kind of understand how to use it a bit better for the sake of the game, because it's not just for us players and coaches, but it's the whole production and the entertainment value of it is so important, and getting decisions right is part of that, but also having a product on the field that people can enjoy is massive as well.
Now, Mark, this is, right now with USL, there is no VAR yet. However, there was an introduction of VAR Lite, which is just not as robust in the sense of the number of cameras that'll be on the field, / number of views the referee is going to have. So it's going to be a bit more affordable moving into second division levels, third division levels across the world. That's something that's going to be coming down here to USL, some testing this season, and then the next season, the hope and the goal is to implement that. From that perspective, knowing that you're going to be stepping into that world as the coach, does that change the way you coach your players or think about strategies and techniques and tactics?
Yes and no. You don't want to change things too much, but I think that with the idea of VAR and how it can really be accurate with offside decisions, I think you can afford to be a little more risky with the back line. I think Liverpool have, particularly last season when they were so good, really did well with that. They got a lot of VAR decisions in their favor, but it's because they play a super high line. And I think when you have the technology on your side that can really kind of dissect it, to the inch or the centimeter, I think you can afford to probably play a little bit higher, knowing that those decisions are going to be right more often than not with VAR. So I think maybe that could play into it. But in general, I see it being a good thing to get the big decisions correct. I think Dax hit the nail on the head with, you want the big decisions to be right. The penalty calls or those big offside decisions that lead to goals is really kind of where we want to see those things be corrected and right on a more consistent basis.
So for me, one of the biggest things is the ability to kind of have that communication element, right? So VAR now is truly a bridge now between the referee world, laws of the game, players and coaches thinking that they knew what the laws were and quickly learning that, maybe they don't understand the finite detail. And one of those being Shaw Brown. Shaw, I'd love to get your perspective when it comes to how VAR has impacted your ability to produce. So for me, Shaw is that person who tells the story that connects those who aren't in the stadium to the TV, to the game, to show the story. How has VAR impacted your production and what you have to show the viewers in order to properly communicate what's going on in the game?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I'm with Ismail here. It was some bumps in the road at the start. I think one of the first big ones that happened, there was a goal in Dallas, and they brought it all the way back to a play about 75 yards away that happened like a minute and a half earlier, but that's where the actual attack started, and they put a foul there, and it was like, whoa, what's going on? It took us a while to sort that out, but now it's amazing, right? Like to us, my whole job as a broadcast is to be right. Like that's all we care about, is to make sure we do things correctly. And this helps us. I mean, I'd like to push it farther, right? With this year, we moved to a part where we're being told by someone from Pro is on a headset with us to help us, to make sure we don't make mistakes, because we have, and it's not okay. Like, we shouldn't be giving wrong information out. And I've been a big proponent of pushing those things. And I think the Bundesliga is great. What I also think, though, is what the Dutch league and Australian leagues do, where you hear the on-field conversation. Australia's done it live. I don't believe the Dutch have moved it to live, but you've heard it like almost immediately. You can play it back. I mean, that to me would be even more game-changing, right? And I know that it would be harder on Ismail because you got to, between language as well as just making sure you are paying attention as the conversation's going. But imagine being able to listen to what the refs are thinking, because we don't get that part of it, right? The game ends and Ismail might have had a controversial call and he'd want to say why he called it one way, but that's not how this works, right? There's a pool reporter, there's a pool question, and that's it. And I think a lot of refs would like to get things cleared up from that angle too. But I love the implementation of it. I've been involved since the first week that it came out, and like now it's easy. It's part of what we do. And now we're allowed to show what they're looking at, which I think I did that early, and I was asked not to do that again. But now we're able to show the same thing that they're looking at. So, yeah, I mean, it's impacted it for the better. We want to have conversations, and this stuff helps us have those conversations as well as get things right.
Now, one thing I did announce was that Ismail was on the first ever match that used VAR in competition at Red Bull Arena. It was a USL match. So he was actually on that game, administered it first time VAR was used in competition. So Ismail has a long history of VAR, even to present day. Ish, how have you seen VAR evolve, and kind of to that point that Shaw said that may, help Mark and even Dax and others know what's going on in the field? Do you feel comfortable with doing, I know we always kind of joke about, ruling on the field is when we've been messing with some of those. Like, how do you feel as a referee if we made those on-field announcements with a mic?
I'm all for moving down that direction of more. I don't want to use the word transparency, but everybody needs to know what's going on. Makes it hard to implement, but funny you brought that up because I don't know if you saw it, Shaw, but we did trial that at the MLS's back tournament where there were some live feeds into calls. I think there were 2 or 3 during the playoff phase of it. Yeah. It was nerve-wracking for the VAR and the referee because this is the first time now the world is going to hear what goes on. You better get it right and not look like you're guessing and not break that threshold that I'm sure, right, Dax, Mark Geiger or Howard Webb will come in front of you at preseason and tell you, here's how we're going to do it. And then an incident happens and you expect that. Now you hear the dialogue, are we using the same criteria? So personally, and most referees will tell you they're all for it. There's going to need to be some education into the process. The more we expose, the more people need to know so that they don't misinterpret it. That's the challenge. But yes, I think it was taken very positively when there was a live feed and they were able to hear the VAR talk to the referee, break down what's going on, and then come out with the decision. And the players still need to know that. When we come back, they'll ask me, hey, what are you looking at? What do you do? It's very, very important to them from a fairness standpoint to know what's going on. So I think the more, if we go down that path and do it cautiously, it will be great. It will continue to be good.
Yeah, Dax, how would you feel about that if the referees were able to have those over the mic, the whole stadium hears conversations to explain it to everybody? How would you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm all for it. It was a question I was actually about to ask Shaw, why MLS hasn't implemented it. Is that a broadcaster situation or an MLS situation? And you know what? I'm all for transparency. I think that, it is a word that would be good to be used to describe, what players ask for. Transparency and consistency. I think that's the thing that's so difficult right now. I think when it comes to VAR and when it comes to refereeing, and look, from my perspective, when I started my career 15, 16 years ago, I couldn't stand the refs. I thought that they never made the right call. And now, with a little bit more experience, and you start to understand a little bit of really how difficult it is to referee a soccer game at the highest level. Probably one of the most difficult things that you can do in life, honestly, because you're trying to referee guys who are the biggest, strongest, fastest. And I'm not speaking about myself. I'm talking about other players. You're trying to referee guys who are honestly playing at the peak of their sport, and they need to be able to make decisions in milliseconds. And so these guys are human. These guys, these women, they're human. They're going to make mistakes. VAR is there to correct those mistakes. Now, I think the process and the transparency and the consistency of how do we get from point A, which is the call on the field, to point B, the communication that happens between the VAR and the referee on the field, to point C, either overturning a call or confirming a call. If that's all out in the open and if that process is made public, then I think it's going to be a lot harder for players and for fans to complain about what's happening, because then you know exactly what's going to happen. And it's still going to be difficult for the referees because they're going to know that everyone's listening and everyone's watching. But for me, if the referees are doing their job adequately and properly, they're going to implement what they learn and the laws of the game properly. And now I still think that you need to take a little bit of a margin for error because referees are human. Some refs probably interpret a play differently than other referees. That's always going to be the case. I never want that to be taken out of our game because I think that's what makes our game beautiful. At a certain point, you know what? It's almost like we're heading to robots being able to referee our game where there's a hard line in the sand. And if you make a call, you know what? That's the call and that's it. I still like the margin for error that referees have because they are human and how we interpret things is a little bit different. So I'm all for the transparency and the consistency that I think that communication would bring.
How have you felt? All your games are now VAR, unless I don't think you're doing any other games aside from scrimmages without VAR, but then again, we don't need clear and obvious errors there. How do you feel the flow of the matches, right? So us as referees, us interacting with VAR, I mean, we're still on call. So, and trust me, when you're in the VAR booth and you see that there's a little ticker there that changes from green to yellow to red, even though time's not supposed to matter, it does when we're in the booth. It doesn't feel disruptive to us because we're working at that time. How does it feel from a player and a coach's perspective for you, Mark, when you see kind of that time go by? Does it feel like a water break? Does it feel too disruptive? Adding that clarification will naturally add some more seconds on the clock. How's that come from you guys?
That's a good question. I haven't actually experienced it in the USL yet, but kind of putting myself in the position of how I would feel in those situations. I think the extra few seconds would be okay. The extra moments it would take to really make sure the communication was clear and everyone was on the same page and understood the outcome. I think that would be worth those extra few seconds. Because I think everyone's pretty reasonable within the game. I think players are reasonable people, coaches are reasonable people. If we understand it, if players can understand the process and the outcome, then generally everything gets accepted. So I think those extra few seconds would be fine to allow for a clear, defined outcome at the end of it. But I could tell you it's probably going through that. I can see it being quite frustrating in the moment. Like, why is the game being so? Particularly if you've maybe just scored, right, and you're kind of waiting for that confirmation that it's allowed, or did something happen in the build-up? Kind of those moments could be a little bit, bit of anxiety and quite stressful. But I think all in all, I think would be okay with the extra time allowed if we knew that the communication was good and the outcome was going to be, it doesn't have to be in your favor, but I think if we know why, then we'll accept it and we can quickly move on and get the game going again.
Yeah, I actually like that point, because that's something that I have noticed, and we all, I think, have noticed, is that anytime anyone scores now, the celebrations aren't as glorious from the player. Everyone's waiting to see, okay, flag's not up before they would celebrate. Now it's like, glorious. Yeah, the what?
That celebration was glorious. Last time I was with him in Nashville, he scored a screamer.
He does a lot of fist bumps too. Trust me, we know how you guys all celebrate. We do watch.
There's no need for VAR.
We know too.
We zoom in. We'd be like, Dax, does that keep you from celebrating? Does that feel like it takes a little bit out of the air when a ball's in the back of the net? Like, do I have to wait for Ish to say, okay, great, check complete, guys, go ahead and celebrate? How's that feel from your perspective?
It's funny because for the most part, I think players are very instinctive and very bright people when they're on the field. I think most of the time players know that, hey, this could be questionable. I might have been in an offside position. So maybe I'll be a little bit more subdued in my celebration. But it's funny. I mean, Ismail mentioned my goal that I scored last year against Miami in the playoffs. And I mean, it doesn't happen often, but I knew that there was going to be no VAR check for anything because there wasn't anything that could have been VAR. And so I could celebrate organically. I knew that it wasn't coming back. There's certainly a little bit of pause anytime that maybe you're in the build-up to a goal and there was a 50-50 challenge and maybe the referee could bring it back for a foul. It's always something that goes on in the back of your head, and I think it's probably a better question for strikers and players that are in position to score goals more often. But when I see the ball hit the back of the net, I'm celebrating just as I would pre-VAR, because maybe the referee will look at my celebration and just go, okay, it's a goal. We don't need a VAR. It's fine. They're celebrating really hard. Maybe we should give it to them. Obviously, that's never going to happen. But for the most part, I still think that you can get organic celebrations out of it. It's just if you do celebrate and it has to come back, it's a little bit of a buzzkill.
Yeah. So before I move off of this VAR conversation here, I did want to ask, this is your time, this is your opportunity, put it on the record. If you were the head of Ifab, let me clarify, there's two different organizations. There's FIFA that does the implementation of the laws of the game, and then there's Ifab, which creates it. Mark probably knows because they're all created by Englishmen over there. That's everyone who sits on Ifab. There's nobody else in the rest of the world that sits on Ifab. If you could change something about VAR, what would it be? And we'll start with Shaw.
Perfect. I'm sure nobody's going to reach out to me after this. No, I mean, look, I think it's what we've discussed, right? It's not transparency is the word for Ismail, but for the rest of us, I think that's the word we'd use. For me to be able to hear everything from the ref, not just one of the pro officials that are helping us, and that's great. Don't get me wrong, but for me to be able to put that on, it's way better than my announcer saying this is what we're being told. So that would be what I would change. And this is not a conversation that I haven't had with referees and pro. And just so I don't forget, Mark, you brought up a really interesting thing about Liverpool playing a high line because they as a television producer, that's something I'd love to know and think about, right? Because now I can cover a game differently because of those things. So just even have a conversation that's already told me, hey, let's have a conversation with if the VAR changes how you're going to manage something. But that would be it, right? Like, I think that we cover the goals correctly. We are fully aware of the things that they're looking for. I wish everybody understood that every goal is checked, as opposed to a lot of commentators that say, well, they're probably going to look at this one. That would be something I would fix on my side. But from IFAB, it would be the ability to listen in to the ref conversation all the time.
Great. We'll go to Mark. Anything, if you could change on VAR, what would it be?
You know, I'm not sure it's a VAR issue. I don't know how to categorize this, but I've noticed in the Premier League that the linesmen aren't putting the flags up anymore. If ever, they're kind of letting the play out, and that's leading to a lot of confusion. I don't know whether that's because they're being told to let it play out and let VAR do the chip. And I think linesmen in general are actually very good at what they do, particularly at that level of the game. I think linesmen generally get it right. They make some decisions that are just phenomenal, you know. And I see a little hesitation now, cause for concern when and if they should put the flag up. So I don't know if that's a VAR thing or if that's just the how they're being told to wait and allow VAR to come into play for those moments. I'm not sure, but that's something that I would like to see cleared up and really allowing the linesman to go ahead and make a decision and the game play out like that. Because I am seeing a little bit, and even from the player's standpoint, that they'll stop, they'll start, they'll stop. Do we play this play out and see what happens? So I think there needs to be some clarification there. And I'm noticing that in England a lot, right, in the Premier League. I think, you know, and I think the common thing that people have been saying is it's going to lead to an injury because plays are probably being played out too long when it was a clear offside, but the lines were not putting the flag up anymore. So there needs to be something there that they work out in the future, I think. But I'm not sure if that's a VAR issue, or if that answers the question.
No, it does, and actually there is clarification to that. It is a recommendation for the assistant referees to keep their flag down when there is an advantage goal scoring opportunity, right? Where you're not sitting there and there's 6 people in the back, or they are moving for the fact that as we all know, right? Watching the EPL, I always say toes are keeping people onside, right? Or back of an elbow. Keeping people on side nowadays. So that is a recommendation because of how tight it is. But I do like the fact that you hit on the head. And then there's also that fear, right? Prior to, if someone put their flag up and it was a little bit too quick, or maybe it was technically wrong, and then all the players saw the flag, they would just naturally kind of stop, even though we all know play to the whistle. Nobody played to the whistle. They always played to the flag. Regardless, I think they were trying to eliminate flag going up, and maybe it was a correct call and affecting the players in that regard. However, that is a good kind of a thing, because I had a really good conversation. I mean, I think one of the first tournaments we saw that at was at the Women's World Cup in 2019, where the flag wouldn't go up for, it felt like anything. Right. And then you had players having to track 20, 30, 40 yards back on a defender's legs. Like Dax could tell you, you don't want to track 20, 30 yards back when you're going against some of the fastest strikers in the world. You want to save those legs for those moments that you need to. But that is a current recommendation. That's a good suggestion, because I have felt that struggle, and players have told me that. How do we fix that when we all know that person isn't in an offside position, or more than likely will be? And I think that's in the adjustment of the scenarios and education of the referees. I think it was worse. Not I would say worse, but we were more generous to keeping the flag down in the beginning to make sure we kind of met that pendulum back to that sweet spot, so we can get a little bit more precise about it. Ish, do you have anything more to add on the AR flag thing?
It's my number one problem right now, because I mean, Mark, you're not the only one. I mean, most of the defenders and defensive midfielders and coaches lose it when to them it appears quite off, and then we play another 10 seconds or whatever, or 20 yards, and I have to tell them it's the protocol or whatever. It's a double-edged sword, as you know. You kill a play, and then you could kill a goal, or you let it play out and you allow a goal. And I think that the magic is how can we shrink that. Right now, the recommendation, and you're going to hear me use this term, Christina heard it a million times, I heard it a million times in seminars and training, is that it's got to be a house before you raise your flag. It's going to be like, it looks like a big house between the defender and the attacker before you raise your flag. Well, we're not that bad. I mean, we can tell if it's 2 yards. Give me something less margin. I'll work with it. And that will be more acceptable. There will be less of those in a game than how there's a lot of them where the defenders, they hold it. The attackers are clearly off. I would like to see that changed because I think we have stats now in MLS that show how many times we delayed and it was offside versus how many times we raised it and it was wrong. And it's going to be lopsided. And I hope we change that. I think it will be good because it frustrates people, and that's the last thing I want is an angry Dax in front of me. So.
Nobody wants that.
Wait,
Nobody wants that.
Dax.
No, never. No one's ever seen an angry Dax.
I think that the offside situation with VAR is something that is very, I think, frustrating and difficult to take because there's so many different interpretations of what different leagues, how they approach it. And I think, like Mark said, the Premier League for me is one where I don't quite understand how the language of VAR is clear and obvious error, correct? So when I'm playing in a game or when I'm watching a game on TV and I see the VAR literally taking me back to geometry and I'm really bad at math and he brings out the protractors and the lines and the numbers and it's just you're literally talking about millimeters, right? And like maybe like a toenail or something like that. And it's very frustrating that when I look at it, like if I'm a player, the laws of the game, the way I interpret it is, especially with VAR, if it is not clear and obvious, then you should not overturn that call. And so if you want to change the language of VAR to say to the absolute letter of the law, to the most minuscule letter of the law, then fine, you can bring out that type of technology. But I like how MLS does it in a sense that if a VAR is looking at an offside call and the referee decides to keep his flag down and a goal is scored and it goes to VAR, if the VAR cannot tell whether the player is offside or not, that to me is not clear and obvious. The goal should stand. And that way, you still are letting the referees do their job. You're still accounting for a small margin of error. But ultimately, the problem for me is that when you come out with it and say clear and obvious, not all of these decisions are clear and obvious. They are to the millimeter. And to me, the way I interpret the offside law is the attacker gaining an unfair advantage? And if his big toe is a millimeter behind the center back, he's not really gaining an advantage. And if you can't see it with your naked eye, then I don't think it's clear and obvious. I don't want it called. So the offside rule for me is one with VAR that's so tricky, and I like the way MLS interprets it. And ultimately, with all these different angles and lines, how can I trust that the camera angle and the lines are accurate, right? I mean, these are questions that I think come into it when I look at how the Premier League does it versus the Bundesliga versus MLS. I play here. I personally enjoy the referees still having to do their jobs and looking at a play and saying, okay, this is exactly what I think. You might need to come look at it, head referee, because I don't know if you're going to interpret it the same as me. He looks like he's offside, but come look at it. And maybe he'll disagree, right? But at least we're still having the referees do their job. You know, I'm sure some people will disagree with that and they want to get the call exactly right down to the millimeter. But for me, it's frustrating to watch.
Yeah, no, and Dax, I'm going to piggyback off of you on that. Oh, go ahead, John.
I mean, look, I'm going to preface it with I think MLS does it right too. But I interpret the rule of offside as either you're on or you're off, period. And so
Fair.
I interpret it with VAR actually is fixing on and off, not clear and obvious, because I agree with you, often it's not clear and obvious. But to me, it's either you're on or you're off. And if finger's a bad choice because you can't use it. But if my eyelashes make me off, then I'm off. I don't like it, but that's how I interpret the rule.
And so then you're dealing with maybe the language and how you put in the language in the laws of the game specifically for the offside rule. Because if you want to talk about every goal is checked, every red card is checked, every handball is checked. The clear and obvious can be the threshold there, but if you're talking about offside, you say you're either on or you're off. We're going to use the technology that we have to put lines on the field, and you're either going to be on or you're off. Don't use the terminology clear and obvious, because I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think you hit that in the head in the sense it's an education component as well too, right? So MLS, what we don't have is essentially that line that gets drawn across. The ones you see in MLS are TV drawn. They're not actually drawn by the referees, right? As opposed to where in the English Premier League, you actually have that paradigm, that line that goes across. It's actually the Hawkeye that's been calibrated. And so that's why it gets so, you gave me kind of the heebie-jeebies when you mentioned geometry, because I wasn't good at geometry either. So trust me, I don't want to go back to that. But that's kind of where you see it get so scientific when you have conferences or leagues that, or tournaments, that leagues that have that extra Hawkeye that is calibrated to be able to give you kind of that geometrical shape and line up. So actually, I would agree with you on that. If I could change only one thing, there's a couple things I'd change, but if I could only change one thing, it would be going to the language, because clear and obvious is still right. You're either onside or you're offside. I mean, right? It's either black or it's white. It's one or the other. It's not something in the gray that's subjective. When we talk about tackles, when we talk about those situations, it's just only whether you're on or you're off. However, the Dutch, and to you guys' point about consistency, unfortunately, throughout a couple of leagues around the world, there isn't consistency going on. And that's, the fear of IFAB, the fear of FIFA to a certain extent, is we always want consistency. However, it's getting away from us a little bit. So if we can bring it back, and one of the methods or one of the leagues that I've actually truly enjoyed, that I think for the fact that in this game, goals shouldn't be scored very often. And that's the beauty of this game. We can have a 0-0 game, and I think we can all agree it might be one of the best games in the world. And that's hard to explain to an American sports fan. But we want goals to be scored. We want them to be celebrated. Trust me, as us referees, our goal isn't to find any and all way to negate a goal at all, right? But if we go towards something, and I'm going to just say this right now, is the Dutch League. The Dutch League does this where there's a margin of error. There's a centimeter, some percentages, right? Where there's two overlapping lines. That's something that I would propose, that have proposed, would be something we can go to where it does. You're either on or you're off, but we give this margin of error, because I think anyone who's played the game before understands a centimeter isn't enough for an advantageous opportunity that takes away from the defender. But those are my thoughts. Ish, did you have anything else to change on your side?
I'll be resisting that so that it doesn't come over here.
Smart.
No worries about that. I don't want to take over something. I mean, we can even get into the thickness of the lines. Trust me, football does not want that, and I'm glad Dax sees it that way. Sorry, Shaw, but less headaches, better for us.
Yeah, and these conversations are important, because one thing I think some people miss is that IFAB listens to the football soccer community. If there's enough uproar, if there's enough, concern, not just from a viewer perspective, especially the fans, right? Obviously, they're the ones that everyone's, delivering this for, is the fans. If there's enough uproar and enough voices outside of it, us as referees are only tasked with application. We're not tasked with creating it. But if you all have that, and we feel it too, I'm telling you, Dax, we feel it when you guys are on the field and we're like, oh, that's a little bit rough, right? We actually do have hearts when we're out there, right? We don't show it, but we actually do have hearts when we're out there. So Mark, Dax, believe us, we do. Continue to voice, as I always say, if you don't like the law, go to your congressman or your senator, your representative, and have them change it. That would be it. Which kind of moving from that VAR topic, I know we like to talk that a lot. Let's talk about another controversial one that everybody loves, handball. We call it the handling, but everyone else calls it handball. So kind of to kick that off, handball has always been difficult. It's a polarizing call, from the grassroots efforts when you're U6 and the ball ever hit the hand or was anywhere near the upper torso, you heard some random parent scream handball, right? Which as us referees, we're like, I'm pretty sure that hit the kid's head, but it's okay, we'll move on. Recently, IFAB has made a clarification to the handling. Just to be clear about that, the handling law actually did not change. It was clarified in application when we call for kind of a jargon, attacker handball versus defender handling, and how we apply that, etc. Do you feel, and I'm going to start with Mark, do you feel that the handling law has been clarified or only further confused?
I feel like it's a little bit more confusing. from my standpoint and from what I've seen. I've seen, once again, I think it's a consistency thing. I think it's very hard to be subjective with handball because things happen so quickly. Shots can come in, pretty quick, from short distances. And if it hits the defender's hand, is it handball if it's unintentional? I'm a little old school with it. I think if it's unintentional, regardless of where the arm is, I think it's harsh to call handball. And then there's the attacking one now that seems to be coming in. There's a lot of goals pulled back if it touched a hand in the build-up. And that's where I think VAR has really come into it, and they're able to identify those moments. And I'm not sure I agree with that because, once again, if it's intentional, I think, and I do think you can see the difference between an intentional handball and an unintentional one. And I think VAR could help with that because it's difficult in the moment to assess that as a referee. It's very difficult. I think if VAR could do that, it would be a big help. But for me, I think the handball rule, it's a tough one because a lot of the times it's just unlucky. The ball hit your arm, you hit your hand. It was a shot from 3 yards out, and it smashed against your arm. Is it handball? I'm not sure. So for me, it's a little bit more confusing. I think in my head, I've got a good understanding of what I would like it to be, but I'm not sure I understand the application of it at the moment.
Are you guys able to hear
Ismail?
Sorry. Mark, as a coach, do you ever ask your defenders to defend with their hands behind their back in the box?
No, never have. No.
Good. It's dangerous.
I don't like that.
Handball for me, and I agree with what Mark said. I'm a little bit old school as well. But I also think it's really difficult for referees, and maybe I'm wrong. Ismail can probably shed more light on this. I think it's really difficult for referees to determine intent. I think when Diego Maradona, rest in peace, sticks his arm up to hit the ball in the goal, the hand of God, everyone can agree, okay, that's an intentional handball. But is it an intentional handball if a defender is not defending with their arms behind their back, but they make themselves a little bit bigger, and maybe the ball just happens to hit them in the arm? Is it intentional? Is it not? I think it's very tough for the referees once you start to get into the weeds with intent, right? And so I do agree with Mark that the rule seems to get a little bit more confusing now, attacking phase of play versus defending phase of play. My honest opinion is that the only way you can clarify the handball rule, so it's universally understood that this is the only thing that we can do to make it understood, is that whether it's intentional, whether it's not intentional, if the ball hits your hand, it is a handball. It does not matter what your intent is. It does not matter if you were trying your best to avoid it. If the ball hits your hand and your hand is outside your body and you are being made bigger and you gain maybe a slight advantage, whether it's defending or attacking, it is going to be called a handball. And if it just happens to be in the box, it's a penalty. That's the only way that I think you can really clarify the rule so that everyone understands it. And I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. But ultimately, all these different interpretations of handball, you're just going to continue to go in circles trying to come up with intent. Did he mean to do it? Did he not mean to do it? Is he gaining an advantage? It's just very, very difficult, I think, for referees. I mean, the handball rule is difficult for players too. I personally have tried to adjust how I defend because as a defensive midfielder, I find myself defending in my own box quite a bit. And so if I know a guy is lining up to shoot, I have actively in my brain thought, okay, I'm going to need to try to keep my hands very close to my side or behind my back. And it's not natural. It doesn't feel natural. I don't like doing it. A lot of players don't feel natural doing that. But ultimately, I do know that I run the risk if the ball hits my arm in the box that the referee is going to call it. So that's kind of what I have had to do personally to adjust my game. So I don't think there's any simple solution. If you want to figure out handball, then any ball that touches your hand is a handball, and we'll call it a day.
Now, Dax, to clarify, that's meaning even if it's not making your hand bigger, if it's just naturally by your side and it hits you, are you saying that in your interpretation, if you could to make it more?
In my interpretation, if your hands are by your side and against your body or down by your side and it hits your hand, it's not a handball. But if it is anywhere away from your body at all, doesn't matter intent, then it should be called a handball. That's the only way that you're going to be able to say, okay, now everyone understands what the laws are and what they're getting themselves into. Even if they don't mean it, even if their eyes are closed, close your eyes, defend like that, doesn't matter. If you're making yourself bigger, it's a handball, it's going to be called.
I just worry, though, that an attacking player will see your hand just slightly off your body frame and just shoot it right at your hand immediately.
Hey, Shaw, you know this as well as I do. How many CONCACAF games have you produced? All right, this is called gamesmanship. You don't want a penalty called on you? Then take your hand out of the way, man.
Dax, I can't wait for the game to finish 10-12 with only 8 guys on both sides of the pitch. Because
I'm not saying that card. I'm not saying a red card needs to be produced every time. I'm just saying, hey, man, look, at the end of the day, you might need to adjust how you defend.
That's fair.
So this is one that's always kind of gotten us, because from the law side, and Ismail can talk about this too, is they have modified this for us on application from kind of the beginning. We've always had to evolve. Handling changes every 2 to 3 years for us. But we've also all been players, so we kind of naturally know what your natural arm movement is. Like there was a time period there for 2 to 3 years that if you slide tackled, and even though your right arm that was between you or your left arm, whichever hand was between you and the ground, even if it was tucked in, but it hit the hand, they wanted us to call that handling. That only lasted for 2-3 years, and then they realized, yeah, that's not a good application of the game, right? It's just not natural. How are you going to slide tackle without putting your hand to brace? But we kind of get to this other kind of this natural component. I'm not sure, Ismail, what your thought is, but for me, the kind of the biggest thing that kind of takes the error out of a handling offense for me is the impact. What did that hand interfering with that play on the ball, what impact did it have in that play in and of itself? I know that's not the words or language we use with the laws of the game, right? Intention, we actually don't use either. But I felt like the word impact is something, right? If you're kind of to Dax, to your point, right? If we have someone's hand just kind of out on their side, a little bit higher than maybe naturally, it hits their hand, but there's absolutely nobody else or a player who can get to that ball, an attacking player who can get to that ball. Do we really want to call a penalty kick on that scenario? My answer is going to be no on that. So that's why I lean towards impact. Ismail, what's your thoughts on the handling? Having to be the one to apply.
Yeah, the referee becomes that safety net between fair and crazy, right? What Dax described is actually, that's what I said, you're going to have a good career refereeing or managing referees, because what you described is the new direction. Is if it's natural by your body, so they create this concept of a natural silhouette of a person. If it hits you while you're in that natural silhouette, it's not a handball. Forget it. But as you get bigger out of the body, and there's always that small margin of gray, but if you get it away and it hits you, then it's easier to just stick with the handball. The safety net of the referee is you take the rare occasion when that happens where there's absolutely no chance that player is getting to that ball because it's going out, or is actually completely coming out of the box. And we had that in Orlando. I forgot the teams. The player was running, right? So he was running. His arms were looking out, or he was turning, I think. But the play is actually coming out of the box. The attacker is trying to play it back, yeah, and it hits the defender. I didn't call it. Nobody said boo, because no one expected it. Had I followed that direction, if it's out, call it, I'll be technically correct. Howard Webb will give me a check mark, but the players will be like, what? I mean, it's not going to make sense to them. So they give us guidelines. I think they work 90% of the time. But where we're trying to be better as referees is to find that 10% where the world doesn't expect it. And we need, my goal and our goal is to get better at finding those, because it's not fair. No one accepts it, and then making those exceptions and not calling them. And that's where it gets difficult for us. Because you get a player and the purist like says, no, you told us, and now it's a handball. Now there's complaining and all that stuff. So that's our challenge.
Christina, I think what gets lost in all this is, like, for me, just use common sense. And I know that's difficult because maybe that is different for every referee. But if it looks like a handball and it looks like someone is gaining an advantage because of it, then fine, call it. No, I have no problems with that. But it's once you get into the weeds on, right, like the actual definitions of what a handball would be if a guy's literally going out of bounds or away from the goal and it strikes someone's hand, right? I think Ismail did the right thing in not calling that one that play that he described. But man, just use common sense when it comes to the handball rule. And I think that for the most part, you're going to accept the referee's decision 9 times out of 10. There's always going to be one decision that's made where, you know, people are up in arms literally over what's happening. But I mean, that's the sport. That is what we live with as footballers, as soccer players, coaches, producers, fans of the game. I mean, you almost have to live with that margin of error and that human element that, hey, sometimes mistakes are going to be made. VAR is there to correct all the big ones, but ultimately you can't correct all of them.
Yeah, no, you hit that on the head. We always say refereeing is an art. It's not a science. And that's kind of what gets those people to the higher tournaments, is those who are able to orchestrate that game and feel it at the same time as make sure it's fair and consistent. Now, I can't believe we're almost done here. This is going to be the last question to boot. Kind of everyone in their own different positions. Like, what is your advice to referees? What is your advice to coaches, to players? Shaw, what's your advice to all of us to be able to help us produce a better game? You know, I know you kind of loaded you guys up with this one, but we'll go ahead and start with Mark. What would be your advice to referees that you would like to see, and or just, you know, anything you have?
Yeah, no, a couple of things from my perspective in the USL. I think from a coach's perspective, a player's perspective, we're good if it's just consistent. You know, if you make a call in the first minute for a shirt pull, then we just expect every shirt pull to be called. If you let that play go, then we expect it kind of to be let go throughout the game. We're good with whatever's called, as long as we get an understanding pretty early on the game. Okay, this is how it's going to be, and then we can either adapt, adjust. Players understand, if I do this, it's going to be called because it was called 5 minutes ago. We're big on that, so we're okay with mistakes. I'm personally okay with referees making mistakes. I think I spoke to you before. It's part of the game. The human error is kind of what makes it beautiful. I make mistakes. Players make mistakes. It's just part of the process of putting a bunch of humans on the field and enjoying what happens. At the USL level, I would love to see the center referee communicate more with his ARs. There's been a lot of moments in our games where the AR was in a much better position to make a call, and the referee made the call from way over the other side of the field, or he let a play go. And if he just communicated with the AR, I think it could have been a better solution, a better resolution to that play. The AR had a much better view of it. But for some reason, in the USL, the referee kind of makes all the decisions, or that's how it feels, which I would like them to lean on the ARs more. I think that there's a lot of power there if you can communicate with somebody else and get a better vantage point or an understanding of what just happened. And so I would like to see that personally, a little bit more communication between the crew and just consistency. If that's your interpretation of that moment, then let's go with that. We're okay with it being different game to game. Even it's when it's throughout the game, it gets different. That's when I think frustration from players and coaches comes into it.
Fair. Ismail, I'll start with you. Or Nick, go next to you.
Me?
Yeah, what advice do you would have?
For referees?
No, for the opposite, for players, for coaches. You're speaking on behalf of the referee community. We barely get this opportunity. Let's go.
I know. No, look, I think I feel a bit fortunate to have had the experiences I've had with players in MLS. There are the difficult ones, but for the most part, if not all, it either after the game or the next game, there's always mutual respect, and I have learned to come back and I wouldn't say apologize, but say, hey man, I think I missed that one, that type of stuff, and I saw that they're receptive to that, and it's kind of the same that probably Dax tell you heard me say in the field is, I just need to hear from you what I'm doing, and I can decipher BS from legit. And if the more legit you tell me, I'm going to adjust at halftime. I'm going to adjust with my ARs. I'm going to try to fight for another angle or whatever. So it's just that affording us that bit of, not the respect, but that bit of professional courtesy of, hey man, here's what's happening, and doing it in a way that doesn't force me to have to to assert authority or anything. No, we don't want to do that. So and the more we can do that outside the game, the better. And I know Dax, the coaches, and I think in USL the same way, they have their mechanism where they circle back with the league, etc. But trust me, not all of it gets to us. And for me, the more I know, because I'm going to be able to see the trends. If 5 different players in 4 games told me about something, there's something wrong. So that's what I would like more.
Perfect. Shaw, we'll go to you next. What do you have for us? What's the best advice you can give for us? Those that are on the field running around dying as you're sitting in a nice AC with 30 camera angles calling the shots.
That probably was dream, actually. I honestly, I think look, for the most part for us, right, we've got it pretty close to where I think we'd want it. I mean, we've talked about actual refs feed, but the other thing I think I would say is if you start early and start blowing the whistle, the flow of the game becomes such an issue, even for television, right? And I know you got to make calls. I totally get it. But the ticky-tacky fouls that they start, and it keeps going. And all people start talking about is, God, the whistle never stops blowing. So can't control it. I get it. Fouls are fouls. But I do sometimes wish that I'm going to let that go. I know you don't want to get out of control. I totally get it. But my advice would be just take one pause and think, boy, I've blown the whistle 30 times already in 30 minutes. Like, the flow of this game is terrible. And again, I get it. Like, the match is what the match is. But the flow of the game is really, really important to a broadcast period, right? And if there is no flow, it's not great. Now, often you'll find the best matches are the ones that the referee doesn't do anything. And I'm sure the refs feel the same way. Hey, if I don't have to make a call, this has been a great day too. But like from a broadcast perspective, that would be it, is to just think about like, wow, this game is really getting bogged down. Maybe I need to talk to the captains and tell them, look, sooner or later, we're going to be handing out a card to end all this nonsense. Kalina did that at the Argentina-England game at the O2 World Cup. 1 minute or 2 minutes in, Argentina, bad foul. He got up, he handed out a yellow, and everyone was like devastated. There was basically no more bad fouls the rest of the game, right? And I saw Castrilli do it with the U.S.-Mexico game. Agus does that. He sends him off in a U.S.-Mexico qualifier at Azteca. And it was like, 10 minutes in. And to give yellows to, I think, Hermosillo and Lawless a few minutes later for pushing like that. And that was it. There was basically no other foul the rest of the game because he was like, I'm going to do it. I don't care. I'm not worried about this. So not a great way to handle things maybe, but like from our way, like the game was great after that because people stopped doing stupid stuff by tugging on jerseys and, all those little nonsense things that you're like, really? Why did you even do that? That would be mine.
Fair. Dax, final words on this.
I will try to sum up what everyone said in the way that I see it. If I was going to tell the referees something, it would be, look, just check the egos in the locker room, okay? Leave them in there. Because I think for the most part, and this is obviously coming from a player, every single professional athlete has a little bit of arrogance about them. They're always going to think that they're right. And ultimately, Shaw will probably tell you that more times than not, the fans are tuning in to watch the players. They're not tuning in to watch the refs. And so I think Ismail actually does a really good job of keeping the dialogue open and respectful. But there are referees in MLS that I specifically have had to deal with. I won't name names because I'm still playing and I still have to deal with these guys. But the minute that you open your mouth and disagree with something that happens or disagree with the call, it's almost like there is now a battle for supremacy on the field, and the referee has to win that battle. And I never understand it. As a player, I've tried my best as I've gotten older to always, and because I've been captain, I've always tried my best to, even when I'm angry, speak to the referees in a respectful manner. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen at all. Sometimes players can cross the line. But in my opinion, the best referees are the ones that can take that criticism, they can take that heat and that anger, and they can say, hey, listen, maybe I missed a call. I'll try to get it better next time, but be a little bit more respectful in the way that you're talking to me, and we can have a dialogue. I think for me, the game should never be about the referee. Shaw said it. The best refs are the ones that you never have to talk about. The commentators don't mention the refereeing, right? The people, fans after the game don't mention the refereeing, right? And the players after the game don't have to talk about anything the ref does. So for me, no egos amongst the referees. Just do your job, try to call a fair game, have a respectful conversation with players if they disagree with you, and then we can move on.
No, those are great words. I mean, that relationship, the soccer world's really, really small. We run into each other all the time, but having that respectful professional relationship and the ability to have empathy with one another, being able to see each other from different perspectives. So thank you all for joining me here today. Thank you for having this conversation. Those who were able to join in and or see this later, thank you for having this bridging the gap kind of a concept and being able to see from all perspectives. Now, the 2021 Texas Soccer Summit continues. Next up, we have with the co-founder of the actual Striker Texas, Renee Van D. Zendy. He's going to discuss the second division soccer teams and how they can become relevant in their local communities. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here today.
Thank you, Christina.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.